like it was this beautiful reminder of, oh, remember the miscarriages? Remember we were scared what Malcolm would have to encounter because he's Black. We were scared about what Jamal would have to encounter because he's autistic. And we're supporting them. We're guiding them. And we don't have to know everything. And so it was just this part of me that was able to relate to the part that was scared, that needed the answers or was afraid of what was to come. Um, so it was that pendulation back and forth between the part that was still constricting or grieving about what we thought would be, and the part that knew, like, we've experienced what we didn't think would be, and actually it's turned out really beautiful.
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. Hey, Camille, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah. So I thought maybe we could just start by orienting anyone listening just to your experience so far. Yeah, this is your third pregnancy.
Yes.
And let's begin there, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so some of you may have recalled a couple of months ago, I dropped the bomb on a random podcast that I found out 2 hours earlier I was pregnant. And I am still pregnant, about 7 months pregnant now. And what was really interesting in that episode was like it was part of my own healing journey to reveal that early that I was pregnant because of the history, or like you can't talk about it until you're at least 3 months. And I remember saying, like, no, I want to talk about it now. And if I lose the baby, we can talk about that too. And that's all part of this. So I've really felt called to continue to share my experience. So about 2 months ago, I was going in for a 20-week ultrasound, and the technician found that baby had a heart condition, a hole in the heart. And this particular heart condition is also highly correlated with children who have Down syndrome. So we did some further testing and found that baby is also more likely to have Down syndrome. It's not 100%, but statistically, it seems more likely to have Down syndrome. So that was just something new and unexpected that we hadn't anticipated to experience in this pregnancy. And what I have found so incredibly supportive and spiritual is that things come when they're supposed to come. And by that, I mean, it's been really incredible to witness how a lot of these somatic practices have been supporting me in processing this information.
So what did it feel like when you first were given the news? Because this is a good example of shock trauma.
Mhm.
We think of shock trauma just with things like car accidents, but when you're suddenly given something that's really overwhelming or sudden, even when you say you call a friend, mom died this morning,
Mhm.
that's shock. And if it overwhelms the system, it can resonate in the body like a shock trauma would. So what happened inside of you when you heard that?
So when the technician first said, "Oh, baby has a heart condition," I think my body went into freeze. Like I was still present. The doctor went into talking about a lot of details that I couldn't fully receive. But the thing I remember thinking is, like, fundamentally, what does that mean? What does this heart condition mean? We still continued through the ultrasound, and there was just, I think, this bit of freeze. And afterwards, I was able to meet with a genetic counselor who again was giving me some additional information about the particular heart condition and the fact that it's more likely to be associated with Down syndrome. And again, I could witness myself being present, but there was just a lot of a freeze in the body because again, the question in my body was just like, so what does this fundamentally mean? Like, what's the answer? And yeah, so freeze was definitely the first response, I think.
And I think it's interesting, we've been speaking about freeze in our membership. And one of the pieces that almost always goes along with it is like this anesthetic quality, like not fully feeling yourself. Like you're
Mhm.
there, you're like you said, you were present, so you were listening. But what parts of you did you notice were numb or unable to feel what you were hearing?
Yeah. So it didn't, how do I put this? At the moment, I didn't notice the numbness, but I could notice the sensation return later. And that was like a lot of waves. So one of the first sensations I remember experiencing, it was either later that night or the next night, was just this immense constriction inward in my chest area. And it was just this pulling in. And as I sat with it, it was just this, again, this pressure, this tightness. And when I observed it, this two really salient ideas or concern just emerged. Like, first and foremost, like, who the hell am I to raise a child with a heart condition or to raise a child with the Down syndrome? I don't know anything about this. I'm going to fuck this child up, or the world is going to fuck this child up. And so it was just this constant pulling, this crunching, pulling inwards into the chest area. And so that was one of the first sensations that came back as I came out of freeze, the numbness. But to your point, in the moment, I really couldn't notice the numbness. It was just sort of this blank slate of, okay, I'm receiving the information. I hear what you have to say. I'm going to go home and Google a lot of this. Yeah.
So that constricting kind of pulling in sensation, and then those overcouplings, like,
Mhm.
the world will fuck them up, I will fuck them up, who am I? Was that part of what came through as the numbness faded, or was that something you were mentally with in the room as you were hearing this?
That came through as the numbness faded. That wasn't there in the moment. Like, I wasn't feeling the pulling or the tightness. As I related to it, tears started to come as well. None of that happened in the moment of hearing about the heart condition or meeting with a genetic counselor. It was more so just, I'm here, I'm receiving the information. This is a lot. Yeah.
So this is great for those of you listening, because what Camille's sharing and teaching us here is these expressions and emotions and sensations, and even the awareness of what's overcoupled or the meaning that was made. These are all the things that want to emerge during the moment when we freeze. But the body's freeze is like this constriction against what wants to express. So freeze response is interesting. It's almost like a response to a trauma response. Like, you might want to walk out the room when you heard that news. You might want to yell. You might want to stomp, all these fight or flight responses that are expressive outward. Yet the freeze came through and constricted against any of that happening. So you could sit there, kind of take in intellectually as much as you had the capacity for. And then later, when you were able to feel safe, embody your senses, these places in you began waking up.
Yeah.
Now, did that waking up, was that something you prompted with the work that we do? Was it just natural because you got home? Like, was it weeks later? Tell us about that.
Yeah, a couple of things. Like, I remember still being both with the doctor and the genetic counselor, and them asking or saying, like, I know this is a lot. How are you feeling? And I think I remember I either said, I feel fine, or I'm not feeling, like, because I didn't feel
Hmm.
anything. Like, I'm present, and to your point, like, I'm just intellectually taking this all in. I am not in a place where I'm emotionally or sensationally processing this. It's all just cerebral and cognitive and logical at this point. Um, and but in terms of like the sensations coming on, I think coming home, one, I felt in a place where I was comfortable, where, having had done this work a while, there was a bit of trust even in my own body. Like, I have the resourcing to support myself. I Not that the doctor, the genetic counselor, did anything bad, but there's a part of me like, I don't know if you have the space to be with me right
Yeah.
now. And so I think that there was a part that was, one, comfortable when I got home. And then, like I was saying, it was either the night of or the second night, because it was fairly soon. Like, I felt the sensation start coming back. Um, I just remember like being in my bed and it was dark, and I'm a moon nighttime person. And so there was just something like in that space I felt really comfortable with or safe with. And so the numbness started to fade. And then I started to feel the constriction, the pulling in,
Mm.
noticing the overcouplings. And again, as I sat with that, then the tears started to come, the release of it. And one of the things that was so helpful leading up to this, even prior to finding out anything about baby, was just having the practice of pivoting from judgment to curiosity. Like it was so immensely helpful just to be able to allow my body to experience what it was experiencing without the need to fix it or to change it, to make it better, just to allow it to feel, to allow those waves to come. And to have a knowing somewhere in my body that I had the capacity to be with it.
Mm. So much beautiful wisdom there. The one that's standing out to me is when you were saying, I didn't know if they had the capacity for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such an important piece because this is one reason, people will say, well, why do I freeze? Why do I go
Yeah.
numb? And in this case, there was no like imminent danger to your life in that moment. Someone wasn't screaming at you. There wasn't some like external threat. It was this information you were given about the baby in your body, right? And the future ideas that were coming in were creating an emotional, sensational experience that didn't think it was safe to be seen by those practitioners.
Yeah.
And that's an important, just kind of beautiful example of how and why on a daily basis we go into freeze, because the cry or the yell or the I need a hug or even the curling in, just holding your head, that kind of vulnerable posture doesn't feel safe, or doesn't even feel like it could be held, like forget safe, but like the other may not have capacity for it. And that's usually because it's out of context. Like if you're in, eh, maybe it shouldn't be, but we more work with what is, right? Not what we
Mm-hmm.
want it to be. So what is in the medical field is it's not a very emotional place or
Yeah.
a somatic place. It's an information place, right? So you're sitting and you're getting this information, but they're not also saying like, do you need a hug?
Mm-hmm.
They're not saying, oh, what that feel like in your body? Let's sit for 10 minutes with that. So there's no invitation to process.
Yes. And it was with medical practitioners and people in general, there can, at least for me, be that over coupling of, oh, this person's crying, I need to fix it, I need to make them feel better, which is not what I needed in that moment either. Like I
Yes.
didn't know if they had the capacity just to let me to cry, just to let me be with, like you said, like how are you experiencing that? Like, oh, my heart feels so heavy, there's this constriction. It said, well, no, it's totally fine, you didn't do anything. Like I intellectually know that, but do you have the capacity just to let my body be and
Mm.
experience in that moment?
Without attaching meaning to it.
Yes, like okay, I gotta fix this, I gotta, okay, it's okay, shh, shh, shh. No, I don't
Yeah.
need to be shushed. Again, I logically know this. Do you have the capacity just to witness my expression, my release?
So again, perfect example of why the body would freeze there. So
Yeah.
it froze against the expression because the expression didn't think it could be or should be held there. Freezes until it's in a situation that has capacity for it. And for you, you have an intimate relationship with the moon, with nighttime, you're in your home, and I'm assuming you had space without your kids, just with your own body
Yes.
to apply these practices we do.
Hmm.
What was the first thing? What was the first thing you started? I would say, what was the first practice that helped you navigate that moment in your room with the moon, with the nighttime, and all this information in you about your baby?
Yeah. So, I'm going to take us back to basics, tracking the charge. So, as I felt the constriction, and again, like this just pulling in of the chest, I just watched it, observe it, noticed what colors were coming up, images, how it felt. That led me to the words, the overcouplings. Okay, these are my two primary concerns: that I'm going to mess this child up, the world's going to mess this child up. And again, without needing to fix those things or to logically uh, challenge or question those ideas, just notice, okay, this is what the part of my body that is really concerned about those two things. And that was a really critical part. This is the part of my body that is really concerned about those things. So after being with this really heavy chest area for a while, I also noticed what part of me is not experiencing this. And what was so beautiful and also led to tears was to notice like this incredible lightness in my shoulders, And along, it was kind of ethereal. It was just like all along the outside of my body. I could feel it along the outside of my shoulders, down the sides of my legs. And it was just this lightness, this openness. And I just took some time to be with that. And it was this part of me that's that began to bring up images and words of, we've handled surprises before. Like, it was this beautiful reminder of, oh, remember the miscarriages? Remember we were scared what Malcolm would have to encounter because he's Black. We were scared about what Jamal would have to encounter because he's autistic. And we're supporting them. We're guiding them. And we don't have to know everything. And so it was just this part of me that was able to relate to the part that was scared, that needed the answers or was afraid of what was to come. So it was that pendulation back and forth between the part that was still constricting or grieving about what we thought would be, and the part that knew, like, we've experienced what we didn't think would be, and actually it's turned out really beautiful.
I'm just loving this because it's that piece that you and I love teaching to the students that we have in the course around something doesn't have to change for me to be peaceful.
Yeah.
Like, nothing has changed here. The baby's still developing. The baby still has these conditions. You're going to learn more about baby's condition when they're born. All these things are still real for you. That hasn't gone away. And your body is releasing this fixed state of stress and anticipating these future threats because you're doing this practice. So your baby gets to develop in a body that's feeling more soothed than stressed. And I think that that's such a gift that you're giving to your baby and to yourself as a mother. Like, you're really learning this whole other skill set as a parent before this child has even been born. And those of you listening, like, when you hear Camille say back to the basics, she's referring to everything we teach in the 6-week course. So if you hear us talk about things you don't know what we're talking about, just you'll have to take the course. You have to take the course to learn what we're talking about. But I think what I love about this is, actually, I'm going to pause. What comes up for you when I said all that?
Again, how do I put this? Things come. This is going to sound so, like, out there, but I really do feel like things come when they're supposed to come. That is, with each of my children, the ones I've given birth to, the ones that have miscarried, I've learned something, and each one has allowed me to have the capacity to be with the next, even though the initial, like you're saying, the shock trauma is like, oh, how am I going to handle this? Then it's, but wait, remember what happened with the last kid? Oh yeah. And so there's that piece of it, which I think is just so beautiful. Each child has taught me something about myself or pushed me to meet my edge. And I'm also in a place in my life where I feel much more at capacity supporting a child with a heart condition or with Down syndrome, because for those of you who aren't aware, like, I've transitioned out of corporate America. So I have a lot more flexibility. I have a lot more agency about my schedule. This is, to be quite frank, I don't know if this was my first or second child and I was still in corporate America, would I have terminated the pregnancy? Because I was, well, there's just no way I can fit this into my schedule. Like, there's no predictability. How am I going to do this? But there are just so many things in my life right now that I feel that allow me to have the capacity to be with this child.
I think that's the part that I really love about this and this work in general is it's this constant building capacity through the natural activation and ruptures of life. So it's not like we're trying to, you don't get to a place where you're just, I'm settled. You get to this place of, I'm settled with what's in front of me until the next thing is in front of me. It's this constant cycle, really. And so I guess what I'm curious about is, when you felt that place in you that was okay with all this, that wasn't stressed, the parts that had the muscle memory of, well, Jamal went through this, or I went through this with Jamal, he's okay. Went through this with Malcolm. He is okay. Like, what was it like to, is the question what was it like, or is the question more what is it like to from that moment to now? Because this was a month or two ago this happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this last month or two, what's it been like to live in that part of your body or from that part that's like, I'm actually okay with this?
Yeah. It's so a couple of things come up. So first there's to what you're saying, it's not like this part has gone away or is no longer there. It's absolutely not as intense like when I first found out. Um, but when it flares or if it comes up, then I have the practice of going back to the part that reminds me, like, oh no, we've experienced this before, or what's happening right now in the present moment. Um, so it's been really resourceful or supportive to know that I have this both of these things in my body, because it keeps me from identifying with a particular sensation, both quote unquote good or bad. It keeps me from identifying with the idea like I'm stressed by this pregnancy, and it also keeps me from identifying with, oh, like I'm totally cool with this pregnancy. Both of these can live in me, and they can respond and relate to each other. And so really now at this point, I haven't had the same intense charge or constriction or pull that I had when I first found out. And because of that, it's interesting when you meet people who want to or need to trauma bond about this. And I'm not in a place where I feel the need to trauma bond about this, whether that's friends or relatives or even medical practitioners. I'll get people asking, like, are you experiencing signs of depression? Are you experiencing signs of anxiety? No, because when I do experience signs of anxiety, I have practices to support me. When I do experience signs of depression, for me, that's a signal that I need to allow my body to rest, which is another practice. So no, I'm actually settled. And some people can perceive that as, oh, you're bypassing, you're numb, which I know the difference because I experienced numbness when I first found out. Like, no, I'm really settled in this moment and I'm taking things as they come. And some people don't have the capacity for that because
So
they're
they,
anxious about it. Yeah.
right. So that's what I was going to ask. There's two things you just said. So one is the projection of expecting that you're going to be going through suffering because of this,
Yes.
because that tends to be the way with these things. And then the second part is people wanting to relate to you through bonding over the pain and suffering of this.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you say, I'm actually okay with this? Like what's an actual response?
Yeah, I think there's sort of this dismissive, like, okay, like, I'll be here when you break
Okay,
down.
sure you are.
You
Here's
are.
my number.
Okay. Like, who would be okay with
Right,
this?
right.
Is sort of that response. And what's really been interesting to your point is even when I've been a little judicious in who I choose to tell. Because of that, there are going to be some people who are expecting the trauma bonding, or even at its most fundamental level, there are going to be people who I say, oh yeah, baby has a heart condition and they probably have Down syndrome. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, why are you sorry? Which shocks the hell out of people because now they're in a part where they have to respond. They're like, well, wait, this isn't part of the script. You're supposed to tell me your baby
Oh
has
my
Down syndrome.
goodness.
I say, I'm sorry. And we hug. But I said, why are you sorry? Then we have to get into a discussion. We explore, like, so why is that your natural reaction to learning that
Yeah.
my baby might have Down syndrome or my baby does have a heart condition, which has been really interesting.
It's like that example I gave when Eamon buys the tampons,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Do you need a bag?" And she goes, "No, I'll eat these on the way home." And there's like 90% of people just go, "Okay, have a good day." They're not even with, but it's like when you break this script that we've been given, it invites like real connection, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It invites like I wouldn't even say real connection, individual connection, because we go off of so many group identities and so many group ways of how things should be in the human experience. But
Mhm.
I'm such an individual person. I've always been. I'm always like, what's it going to be like with this person? What's it going to
Yes.
be like with this? So they get to meet you as an individual that is outside of the rules of society of what we should suffer or not suffer around.
Exactly. And again, I've had previous experiences that have kind of prepared me for that, like around my miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies. Again, if I bring those up, people say, I'm so sorry you experienced that. Oh, why are you sorry? Because for me, a lot of beauty came out of it. Or you and I have talked about death. Oh, so and so died. I'm so sorry for your loss. You'll never hear me say that. In fact, I'm trying to figure out the best way because I don't want to say I'm so happy for them, but I don't say that because I know that freaks people out. But instead, I choose to say, "How are you experiencing that?"
Me too.
Which I find, to your point, allows for that individual to tell me how they're experiencing it, and whether it's that or again, oh, I'm going through a divorce. I'm so sorry. Well, is sorry appropriate? Let me ask you, how are you experiencing that? You might say, I am so fucking happy.
Yes.
I'm happy for you. Like,
Yes. I mean, I've been through so many deaths that were really kind of painful and
yeah,
like for the person dying, like weeks and weeks and weeks of agony. And when the death came, so many of us were relieved for them. So when someone's first idea was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, that must be horrible," for us, we're like, "This is amazing. Actually, we're so glad they are free from this body."
yes,
You know, so it's so different for each person. I've always loved that very famous spiritual quote that pain is, what is it? I just forgot.
so famous.
So famous, so good. I couldn't remember. It's like pain is definite, suffering is optional. It's something like
Yes,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Definite isn't the word, but you know what I mean.
yeah.
I think
Mhm.
that's such a good one for the work that we do because um, I would say to pretend pain doesn't exist is dissociative,
Yeah.
right? It like denies the human sensational experience. But I truly believe suffering doesn't have to.
Hmm.
And you're walking us through that right here because you felt the pain of the shock, you felt the pain of the overcouplings, you even felt the pain of the reverberations of some of your traumatic expressions with your sons based on what they would go through in the world. All of that came into your body. That pain was alive in you. Pain isn't a bad thing. When we don't know how to be with it, it becomes this kind of fixed state. And that's when you say to someone, "Oh, you're depressed. Oh, you're anxious. Oh, you're suffering. You are dysfunctional," whatever the word is. But the pain in and of itself is like a really healthy expression of aliveness. It's if we don't know how to be with the pain, that's when we suffer because we're just stuck in this one expression of thousands, which in that case tends to be pain. So
Hmm.
I'm curious if you can just tell us from your own body and even as a facilitator of this work with me, like how has your relationship to pain changed? Tell us that.
Yeah. So I don't identify as a Buddhist, but the four noble truths of Buddhism really support my body. And loosely interpreted, the first one is either suffering, or some people interpret it as dissatisfaction is inevitable. It's going to happen.
Hmm.
The root of all suffering, or the root of all dissatisfaction, is attachment.
Mm.
To minimize or release dissatisfaction or suffering, you can release or minimize attachment. So, what really helps me is to notice when I'm experiencing that pain or when I'm experiencing suffering, it's probably fundamentally rooted in some attachment, some expectation, some overcoupling, or something I thought was supposed to be. I'm grieving what I thought my future or someone else's future was going to be.
Mm.
And so, what helps me is to, one, release that attachment, but that can be difficult. But what's really, really tangible for me is to come back to the present moment. That is, I find attachment to be really, really future focused. But if I can just orient to what I'm experiencing in this moment, it really helps me to release that attachment to the future. So, particularly with baby, the heart condition is literally like a hole in the heart where the four chambers, all the blood all commingles. And the point of having the four separate chambers is so that the oxygenated blood does not mix with the deoxygenated blood. So really, this only becomes a condition when baby starts breathing oxygen. So
Mm.
when baby's in my womb, the heart condition really isn't a heart condition. So if I can allow my awareness to be with that and just notice, like, oh, in this moment, there's actually really nothing wrong with their heart. Can I
Mm.
just take a moment to be with that?
Hmm.
Or to even notice one of the other fears was, well, what are they going to experience in the world? Well, I broke that down. So what's one of my concerns? Well, what about when they're 4 or 5, their teachers and their other students? Okay, that's when they're 4 or 5. So we're really saying we got 4 years before we even need to think about that. And again,
Hmm.
so right now they're in my womb. They're not having to deal with other students. They're not having to deal with other teachers. So again, I bring myself back to the present moment. And that's what really helps me to release those expectations.
I mean, this is a beautiful excerpt of really somatic time traveling, right?
Mhm.
Because when you're thinking of them 5 years from now, you're not there, but your body is creating the sensations as if you were there based on the images in the mind. So it's not even what it will be like 5 years from now. Even if it's like a horrible experience for the baby, it's going to be a different horrible experience, and you're going to have a
Mhm.
different capacity at that time that you don't have right now. So to invoke this horrible experience in your mind that isn't happening yet, it literally adds to that excessive firing of these neurotransmitters and more adrenaline and more freeze response and more stress and pain on top of a situation right now that's inherently peaceful. Like the reality, like you said right now, is your baby is happily swimming in your womb, completely cared for, healthy, fine. And it's like to feel that. Even when I say that to you, where do you feel that in your body?
Oh yeah, like I absolutely right in the belly, in the gut, in the womb. Like it's just this really open, spacious place in my body that has actually provided a lot of grounding whenever I do experience constriction or worry, or when I start to orient to the future. I can place my hands on my belly and it just brings me back to, okay, but right now I can feel baby doing a backflip. They're having the time of their lives.
That's awesome. This is also one of those strange moments of noticing, well, baby isn't bothered by this probably right now. It's like it's my story that's bothering me,
Yes.
right?
Yep. It's my story. It's my attachment. Yeah.
I'm always so curious. I've never asked you this. How does your husband do with all this? Is he like you with this? Is he opposite? How do you two practice these things?
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't say like he's not like super somatic about it. Like he hasn't dug into the practices like I have, but for both of us, it is spirituality has been an underpinning of just how we tend to navigate things. And so it is really similar for him in the respect of um, for him, I'm gonna let go and let God. It's
Hmm.
can I release, can I be in a place of humility? And for those of you who don't know, both me and my husband identify as Muslim, and so the English interpretation for some of of Islam is to submit, but the other interpretation is self-surrender. That
Hmm.
is, can you self-surrender to what is to be? And so it's really come from in that place of humility and curiosity, and just take things as they come instead of coming from a place of judgment as to what's best or what
Hmm.
should be. So that's how he's approaching it.
So you both, in different ways and similar ways, really practice non-attachment, practice being with
Yes.
what is, right?
Hmm.
I think that's my favorite thing about religions, all of them, because religion has gotten such a bad rap because of politics and the way
Yes.
people, the way people use it. But at its core, religion's really just a way to be with what is, like every
Hmm.
single one. And I think it's so beautiful about, the core of these religious practices is like how to give yourself in a humbling way to this greater presence and not think you know the way or you are the way. I think
Hmm.
it's like the way to not suffer, really.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. That's so cool. Um, yeah, so I mean, I'm thinking what we'll do is we'll have to do another, follow-up interview after baby's
Definitely.
born and seeing
Yeah.
like how you're feeling with them, how you're feeling in your body, what you're learning, how you're kind of navigating this.
Hmm.
But I guess I wonder before we start closing, anyone who's listening, what would you not like advise, but what could you offer? You've offered so much already in your story, but is there anything else you want to kind of put out there for people to hear who might have a similar experience?
For me, I have found it really helpful to begin to normalize the quote unquote ups and downs of the birthing process. For example, like I shared super early that I was pregnant, or early in the pregnancy, which I typically wouldn't have done, and most people don't do. But what was really interesting is like right around the time I was finding out baby had heart condition and Down syndrome, I had a friend of mine who was like maybe 2 weeks pregnant, and she told me, and she was really happy about it. She said, "Well, I did it because you told me about yours." And so it was just sort of this nice continuum, like giving this permission, like, "Oh yeah, and if you lose the pregnancy, you can talk to me about that too."
Mhm.
And so if long way of saying, if I had to offer anything to anybody, if you have the capacity, begin to share about your own experiences, because it then begins to give other people the permission to share about
Mhm.
their experiences. And the more we can normalize it, the more we process our sensations rather than bypass and suppress.
I love that you said that. I was thinking before I got on with you, I was thinking about how I'm actually like a private person.
Mhm.
I don't really tell people things. I'm not dramatic in terms of things I want people to know. I'll go through something that I'll have something happen to me, let's say, in a day. That's something I've witnessed, something I experienced with a person. It's like huge that someone would tell 10 of their friends. I say nothing. And Eamon's like, what? Why didn't you tell me this happened? I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
just didn't think to tell you. But when it comes to this online presence, I share so much of myself for that purpose you just said.
Mhm.
The only purpose is just so someone can see something in me and know that, oh, that's just part of the human experience. Let's
Yeah.
express that, right?
Yeah.
And so I just really respect you doing that here. And I thought it was so amazing how we had the podcast episode and you said multiple times, I'm just going to say that I'm pregnant. And whatever happens, I'm going to move with it. I'm going to not have shame. And this has happened and you're moving with it. You don't seem to have shame or guilt or pain around it. When it comes through, you're letting it move. Like you're really applying these somatic practices to this. And it's just gorgeous to watch.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, love. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I want to say thank you to you personally, and as well as the HLN team and the HLN community, because that has also been a place of resourcing for me. So again, you take things or things happen when they're supposed to happen. It's such a resource for me to not just to work with and to be in this space. So I'm so
Oh.
grateful for that.
We just, oh my goodness, we couldn't have this space without you. You're such a big part of it. So I'm equally grateful. Thank you, my love.
Thank you.
That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.